Flight attendant refused to serve a black CEO. The airline paid the price. He boarded the plane like any other passenger, first-class ticket in hand, confidence in his stride. But the moment he sat down, the air changed. Eyes followed him. Whispers spread like static. And when the flight attendant stopped beside his seat, her smile vanished. She didn't see a CEO. She saw someone who didn't belong. What happened next wasn't a mistake. It was a choice, one that would spark a storm no airline could ignore. Because sometimes prejudice doesn't whisper. It announces itself at 30,000 feet. And this time it picked the wrong man. Marcus Daniels wasn't just another traveler. He was the man behind one of the fastest-growing tech companies in the country. Calm, composed, and quietly confident, he never needed to announce who he was. His work spoke louder than any introduction ever could. On that bright Friday morning, he boarded a flight to New York. A routine trip, one he'd taken countless times before. First class, window seat. A few hours to catch up on reports before landing for a meeting that could change everything. But even in moments of success, Marcus knew what it felt like to be judged before he spoke. To be looked at, not seen. He had faced it in boardrooms, in interviews, in conversations that always began with surprise. "You're the CEO." Still that morning he wasn't thinking about any of that. He was thinking about progress, his company, his team, his family waiting at home. He smiled as the engines roared to life, unaware that within minutes, the quiet routine of his flight would turn into something else entirely. Because sometimes, the most ordinary days hide the moments that test who we are and reveal who others choose to be. The seatbelt sign blinked off. Passengers relaxed, laughter mingling with the hum of engines. Marcus opened his laptop, ready to lose himself in work. Then a voice broke the calm, sharp, dismissive. "Sir, this section is for first-class passengers only." He looked up. The flight attendant stood over him, her expression polite on the surface, but her tone left no doubt. She didn't believe he belonged there. He smiled calmly and showed his ticket again. The woman hesitated, then nodded stiffly, but the damage was done. Heads turned, whispers followed. He felt the weight of the stairs press against his back, like a spotlight he didn't ask for. Moments later, as drinks were served, she passed him by. The passenger beside him, a middle-aged man in a tailored suit, received champagne and a warm smile. Marcus waited. The tray moved closer. Then it skipped him entirely. At first he thought it was an oversight. He pressed the service button. Nothing. Minutes dragged on. The same attendant returned down the aisle, avoiding his gaze. When he quietly asked if he could have a glass of water, her reply came coated with condescension. "Maybe after we finish serving everyone else." The words stung more than he expected. He glanced around, and the eyes, the murmurs, the uncomfortable smirks. He'd been in rooms where people doubted his authority, but this was different. This was public, humiliating. Across the aisle, another attendant noticed. Her face flickered with unease, but she said nothing. Silence was safer. Marcus exhaled slowly, trying to keep composure. He thought about his father, who'd once told him, "They can't take your dignity unless you hand it to them." So he waited, quietly observing, documenting every detail. The skipped service, the mocking smile, the subtle shift in tone when she spoke to others. He wasn't angry, not yet. He was calculating. When the meal trays came, it happened again. She handed plates to everyone in the row except him. And when a passenger pointed it out, she brushed it off with a brittle laugh. "Oh, I thought he was with the staff. My mistake." The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it was enough. Enough to twist his stomach, enough to make the cabin feel smaller, heavier. He didn't respond. He didn't have to. Because while she saw a man she could belittle, she had no idea who she was embarrassing or how much her actions would cost her employer. The captain's voice came over the intercom, announcing turbulence ahead. But Marcus barely heard it. He was busy writing an email, not to complain, but to document. Every moment, every word. By the time the plane began its descent, the energy on board had shifted. The other attendant avoided eye contact. The man beside him sat in awkward silence. And Sarah, the flight attendant, who'd started it all, carried herself with the oblivious pride of someone who still thought she was right. She had no idea what awaited her when those cabin doors opened Because Marcus Daniels wasn't just a passenger. He was the largest private investor in the airline, and this flight was about to change everything. The plane landed to polite applause. Passengers gathered their belongings, stretching and chatting as if nothing had happened. But Marcus's silence was deliberate, calm, calculated. The flight attendant, Sarah, still hadn't realized the storm she'd started. As the cabin doors opened, she greeted passengers with her usual practiced smile, until she noticed two airline executives waiting at the gate. Her smile faltered. One of them glanced at a tablet, then at her name tag. "Ms. Turner, could you step aside for a moment?" Confusion flashed across her face. "Is there a problem?" Before anyone could answer, Marcus stood. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His presence alone drew every eye. He handed his phone to the executive, the email thread open, time-stamped, documented, and forwarded to corporate, every word of her disrespect. Every witness statement already recorded by passengers who'd seen it all. Sarah's expression drained of color. I didn't mean, but the executive cut her off. "Mr. Daniels, on behalf of the airline..." Marcus raised a hand gently. "No apologies," he said, voice calm but sharp enough to silence the air around him. "Just accountability." The murmurs grew louder. Other passengers looked on, some embarrassed, some relieved. A few even clapped softly, as if justice for once had found its voice. Sarah tried to speak again, but the words caught in her throat. The man she'd treated as less than wasn't just first class. He owned a seat at the company's board. The executive nodded solemnly. Understood, and just like that the weight shifted. The humiliation she'd handed him now returned, magnified, public, unforgettable. Marcus turned to leave, calm as ever. Cameras caught the moment, and by the time the story hit social media that afternoon, one question echoed across every platform. How many times does this happen when no one's watching? By the next morning, the video had gone viral. Millions watched as the story unfolded. A quiet act of prejudice turned into a public reckoning. Headlines called it "the flight that changed everything." The airline issued a formal apology within hours. Sarah was suspended pending investigation. But for Marcus, the point was never revenge. It was recognition that what happened to him wasn't rare. It was routine. Only this time the world saw it. He didn't celebrate. He didn't boast. He sat in his office later that night, watching the endless stream of comments and messages. Some were outraged. Some were inspired. And too many shared stories that sounded exactly like his. For every Marcus who speaks up, there are hundreds who stay silent, afraid, tired, or convinced nothing will change. That's the weight of racism. It doesn't always scream. Sometimes it hides behind smiles, uniforms, and polite excuses. Marcus made a decision that night. He funded a new diversity and bias awareness program for the airline, not out of anger but out of hope. Because change doesn't start with punishment. It starts with acknowledgement. The next time he boarded a plane, another attendant greeted him, respectful, kind, and maybe just a little more aware. He smiled, not for himself but for what that moment represented. Because progress doesn't happen in headlines. It happens in choices, the ones we make when no one is recording. And maybe that's the real question. How many more moments like this will it take before respect isn't earned? But automatic?